there's very good reason for saying that the canonical Luke is the original.
Thank you for being a Patreon member. Lane Hermanson, I'm going to ask your question to Dr. Dennis R. MacDonald here. Thank you, Dennis, for being here. Dating Luke. Given the recent podcast on Marcion's proto-Luke gospel that later morphed into Luke, and Dr. Litt was showing in his Luke course how it describes a military group that was circa 118, please interview Dr. Litt specifically about this. My question to Dennis, given the above backstory, what are his thoughts on Marcion having a proto-Luke gospel and final Luke dated much later? Lane.
Well, thank you, Lane. I'm going to divide the question into two parts. One about Litwa's claim about this military presence that's articulated in Luke or Acts, and I haven't read that, so I don't know that I can relate to it. The dating of 118 is probably about right. It may actually be a little early. And I say that because when Eusebius is talking about literature that's written under the reign of Trajan, and that's until 117, he doesn't mention Luke or Acts, and he certainly knows of Luke Acts. The issue of having a earlier version of the Gospel of Luke is very problematic for me. Now, many of these people who have worked on the Marcion Gospel are my friends. And I don't want to name drop, but most of the players I know well. Klinghardt and Trobisch and Bilby and Vincent. And
you
so
name
on.
dropped them.
I guess I did.
You had to.
And I honor their work, and I disagree with it very strongly. Their virtue is to show that, in fact, the texts of the Gospels, especially the Synoptics, were fluid until you get to the middle of the 2nd century. So even though the texts that we have in the New Testament are worked over very well by textual critics, the materials they're working actually are quite relatively late. And so that opens up the door as a possibility that you have an earlier Lucan version than some of the materials that have survived textually.
May I, as a layman, kind of make sure I understand what you said, and just so people understand what you were saying and what you think is also just evident based on the work they're doing, is that a final form of Luke, it's a bit fluid, like you said. There's still changes happening to these gospels, and you're not necessarily saying Marcion had a gospel first and then later canonical Luke, but that Luke, whoever Luke, is being messed with by different people who have this gospel?
No, that's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
I'm saying that the texts, for example, of Mark and Matthew in particular, are really quite fluid.
Okay.
And so it's hard to know. And of course, the Q document didn't survive during that period in textual form. So there's a fluidity in the gospel transmission. That's all I would want to say. I am insistent that the canonical Luke was the earliest version of Luke.
Let's get into that a little, if that's okay with
you. I think that was the premise of what Len was trying to tell us.
Yeah, because there's a school, just to paint it for the viewers, Marcion's gospel is before Luke. I know Mark Bilby, Marcus Vincent. That's why I said Marcus, because both Marks. Right. Litwa, others, they align with this. Like you said, Trobitz, others who think that Marcion had a version of a gospel, and that likely, I don't know, Irenaeus, one of these guys, someone in the school of this, took it and they expanded it into what we have as Luke today. Whereas there's the reverse argument. You would be on the side of saying, no, Marcion, and they say Marcion redacted. He cut up our texts and he cut out Jewish prophecies, Jewish material, whatever, or something to this effect. He pretty much redacted the gospel. So you have two schools of thought. What evidence do you have that makes you believe, and pretty strongly? I've seen you're pretty harsh in terms of, hey, I really think they're wrong about this. What do you point to for what makes you think?
Okay, I know they're wrong about it.
Okay.
And they're wrong about it because Luke and Acts are full of Homeric imitation. And some of it is radiating in what they have is a reconstruction of Marcion's gospel. By the way, Marcion's gospel doesn't exist.
Right.
It's also a hypothetical reconstruction, but it's a brilliant one. And people like Dieter Roth and Jason Badoon have done a wonderful job in reconstructing it. And that goes back to Harnack. And so anyway, you have evidence of Homeric imitations both in the Marcion gospel and especially in the rest of Luke Acts. So, for example, Marcion's gospel did not include an infancy narrative. The infancy narrative in Luke is full of imitations of the Homeric hymn to Aphrodite.
Gotcha.
The Acts of the Apostles is not a part of the Apostolicon, the second volume. They're concerned primarily about the gospel. So you don't have the Acts of the Apostles at all. Right. The Acts of the Apostles is full of Homeric imitation and imitations of other authors. So you get rid of that. You get rid of the infancy narrative. But in what they preserve, you still have a version of the Gerasene demoniac, but it doesn't have any of the Homeric features left. It's basically about 6 verses long. You don't have the triumphal entry into Jerusalem, and they all recognize that was omitted intentionally. But that's beautifully crafted after Odysseus's entry into the city of the Phaeacians. Right. And so what you'd have to argue is that you have play with some mythological stuff in Marcion's gospel, and then somebody came along and just put Homer all over the place. Right. You know, in the infancy narrative, in the in the story of the triumphal entry, and in the Acts of the Apostles. That's impossible. I mean, if you think my theory is crazy to have Homeric imitation, this case you'd have to have it in two bundles. Right. One is Marcion's gospel, and the other is the rest of the stuff that's going on. And I can explain why you have a truncation. Marcion is interested in having a scripture that is nice and brief, and you don't have to pay scribes to play it by the line, because you can have a much shorter gospel and a much shorter treatment of Paul. The second volume is a truncated version of 7 or so epistles of Paul. So you get rid of the Acts of the Apostles, and you save a lot of money on papyri by having this truncated version of Paul. You get rid of a lot of this stuff that's going on in the canonical Luke, and you have a nice short gospel, shorter than any of the canonical gospels. You can put them together and you can circulate it, and that becomes your gospel. And it also is focused on Marcion's Gnostic proclivity to be critical of the Hebrew Bible. So some of that stuff also gets removed. Now you'd have to say that the people come along, add things like that. Mm-hmm. There are, I won't mention any names on this score. Okay, I know that there's some people that are interested in my work in mimesis criticism and Homeric imitation, and they try to make it work with the Marcion gospel priority. It doesn't work. You cannot get there from here.
Help me understand how it doesn't work.
It doesn't work because you have to say that you have a dabbling with some Homeric stuff in the Marcion gospel, and then it explodes in the canonical gospel. I just find that is unnecessary. And by the way, these are not full-blown mythologies the same way that you have it. Well, I'll give you another example, the frothing demoniac story. Mm-hmm. You have a fragment of some fragments of it that were in the Marcion story. I think it's 30 verses, something like that, in Mark. I think it's 7 verses in Marcion's gospel. And all of the stuff from Euripides is gone, from the Madness of Heracles. So they're trying to have their cake and eat it too. If you hold to Mimesis criticism and the use of Homer, you virtually have to say that the canonical Luke is first, and then you have a truncation of it, and getting rid of a lot of the things that are related to Judaism, and it just becomes really problematic to put the two together.
Okay. Yeah, so I was curious about that. Like, it sounds to me that the key for you is mimesis. And once you see a narrative template that demoniac, baptism, whatever it might be, and you've seen the antecedent, you're looking at that, and then you're looking at the reconstruction of Marcion, and you have to compare between canonical Luke and Marcion's Luke, and say, okay, why is this episode consistent? And Luke may actually be imitating Mark here, but even elaborating further, as you've shown, like it's like the decoder for you is seeing the Homeric, and then you can measure that looking at Marcion's and saying, why would they cut all that out? Is your point?
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Oh, not cut all that. Why did they add this instead? Using their idea, right? So they're saying that the canonical added.
No, they would not.
So I'm saying you're thinking that he truncated it, right? They're saying canonical people added to Marcion's gospel.
Yeah, but they would not admit that those additions, maybe some would, that those additions are themselves mimetic of Homer.
Okay.
They would just say they're expansions. But some of them may want to do that, may want to say, well, MacDonald's right about, the Homeric stuff, and it was embellished and added later. But it does require two moments. Actually, I would be happy to send this person a PDF of something I've written on Marcion's Gospel and Mimesis criticism. But I am convinced that there's very good reason for saying that the canonical Luke is the original.
Okay.
And that it got truncated, and it did so because Marcion and his group wanted to have a tidy scripture that would circulate more easily. If
I were to reverse it, just to test your brain here and give a pushback, what would it take for you to be persuaded the other way around? What would it take? Would it? I'm throwing out a few things. Would it take someone showing why even Marcion may have actually in his gospel already been imitating Homer, but then an expansion took place where they also saw the same imitation and decided to expand it? I mean, I'm just thinking out loud, like, what would it take for you? They're watching. So the question is, if you're speaking to that scholar or those academics and you are so convinced about the Homeric stuff, which is your whole enterprise, what would you be telling them that they need to do to get you persuaded?
It's a very easy test. I want one example, just one, where they can show that a story that has Homeric elements is in a more primitive mimetic form in Marcion's gospel than in the canonical Luke. I want one example. And what I can show is there are none. And you can explain why you have all these other omissions. I don't think that Marcion or the other people working on the Marcion gospel, the scribes, had any clue that there was Homeric imitation at all. I don't think they saw it at all. And so their job was to truncate it and make it different. So my test is very simple. I want one example where you can show me that Marcion's a version of a story, let's say the Garrison demoniac or the frothing demoniac or almost anything, is more primitive than what we find in canonical Acts. And there are no examples of it. Not one.
So you've looked and you're not persuaded. So they would need to undo this in your mind in order for you to be persuaded.
Undo,
like go and look at the examples and prove that wrong. They'd have to do that in order to persuade you. You'd have to see some primitive.
I'd like to see one piece of evidence of it.
Okay.
I just don't see it.
All right. Well, you heard the challenge, ladies and gentlemen. No, I really appreciate you answering that. And thank you so much. Is it Lane for being a patron? Yeah, Lane Hermanson. Thank you for the question. And you heard the interview. So again, thank you for supporting. If you haven't already, join MythVision's Patreon. Help keep the lights on here so we can keep doing what we're doing. Thanks so much.